thank you again for attending our chai and chat this afternoon. I'm going to probably give a few seconds for you all to get seated. Gopal, I'm going to call out names. And he still won't hear us. Okay, thank you. Dr. Shoaib and everybody, please come and sit in the front. And also know we have chai and dhokla and samosas, courtesy of Gokul Sweets. So please feel free to grab anytime you want to get some water and chai as well. So are we all ready? Okay, great. So why are we here? Right? And I want you all to listen. And this is for the dads out there. So why are we here? How many of you agree that big messages come in small packages? Yeah, that's true, right? So for the next few seconds, I want you all to close your eyes. Just close your eyes and imagine, why are we here? If anyone's going to open their eyes, I'm going to call out to ask a quiz question. On a beautiful summer's day, a father and his 8-year-old son were lying on the grass by the river bank, looking up at the sky and watching the wisps of cloud float gently overhead. After a few minutes of silence, the boy turned to the father and said, "Dad, why are we here?" "That's a good question, son," says the dad. "I think we are here to enjoy days such as this, to experience nature in all its glory, the vastness of the sky, the beauty of the trees, the song of the birds, the rippling flow of the water. We are here to help make the world a better place, to pass on our wisdom to future generations who will hopefully profit from our achievements and learn from our mistakes. We are here to savor the small triumphs of life, passing your school exams, the birth of a new member of the family, promotion at work, a win for our team. And we are here to comfort those dearest to us in times of distress, to provide kindness and compassion, support and strength, to let them know that no matter how bad a situation may seem, they are not alone." Does that answer your question, son? "Not really, Dad." Dad says no. Son says, "No, what I meant was, why are we here when Mom said to pick her up over an hour ago?" Okay, so that's for the dads out there. Now for the real reason that we are here. We have our panelists today. In interest of time, you'll see their profiles rotating in the back end of the projector. But very quickly, Dr. Krishnamurthy is the bone marrow transplant director at CHOA and also works with Emory University and is also a professor of pediatrics at Emory University. Dr. Anna Kenny, thank you for being here, is the director of the basic research program at the Department of Pediatrics at Emory University. Piker is working at Quest Diagnostics, but also is a mom of a survivor of 2-year-old who's living with pediatric cancer. Dr. Wexler is the director of the oncology program at Emory and CHOA, Aflac Blood Cancer Center. So thank you for being here today. We have Dr. Satvir Singh, who is practicing at the Gwinnett Medical Center, is also an oncologist, but basically deals with the adult population. Ranjit represents the community organization, a nonprofit, Access Life America, whom we are sort of collaborating with today. So thank you for being here. Dr. Shar, and I don't have to introduce him, you'll get to know him more, but is a driver of the yoga and mindfulness and meditation across Metro Atlanta. So we'll get to know more from him. So thank you all for being here. The real reason we are here is because September is Childhood Pediatric Cancer Awareness Month. It's very hard when there's a diagnosis been given in the community, especially for a child with cancer. And we brought the panelists and professionalists here today to discuss more. And the agenda is we're going to talk about ask some questions, moderated discussions. And then towards the end, after a break, We are going to have the art auction. We have many paintings that kids have drawn, your kids have drawn. They can come on stage and we'll buy the painting actually, whoever's willing to buy it. And the money will be donated to Access Life America that helps families across in Mumbai for hygienic purposes, especially who come for treatment to Mumbai from far, far away. Okay, so sounds good. Dr. Krishnamurthy, what did you want to be, and if you can do this quickly within a few seconds, what did you want to be when you were a child?
I wanted to be a doctor.
Oh, here, you can have the mic there.
Sorry, I read in the book I wanted to be a doctor.
Very nice. Anna?
I wanted to be a scientist.
You wanted to be a scientist, okay?
I wanted to be.
It's on, yes.
I wanted to be an astronaut.
Oh, nice, okay.
A doctor, too.
You wanted to be a doctor? Go ahead.
Doctor or in health science field.
Okay.
Believe it or not, I wanted to be a pilot.
Oh, good, okay. You can still be one. Okay, great.
Yeah, I think I had multiple desires, and I ended up being a statistician. Thank you.
Very nice, thank you. Is it fun being a statistician?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Very
Yeah,
nice.
We discover new truths, which are lying there, but nobody discovers otherwise. Yeah.
Definitely, thank you. Very much needed data-oriented outcomes. So, Dr. Wexler, so we know pediatric cancer, but can you tell the audience in their terms what types of cancer are there? We know it's a childhood cancer, and we know it's not as similar to the adult cancers, but if you can tell us quickly about the types of cancers, or take your time and tell us.
So pediatric cancer is different from adult cancer. When we think about adult cancers, we think about cancers of the breast, of the colon, of the lung. Kids generally do not get those types of cancers. There are around 13 or 14,000 new cases of pediatric cancer that are diagnosed every year in the United States. And worldwide, it's many, many times that. But the main cancers that children get are leukemias and brain tumors. Together, those make up about half of all pediatric cancers. The other half are a whole bunch of different kinds. So they can get kidney cancer, they can get bone cancer, they can get muscle cancer, they can get cancer of the retina in the eye. And there's a whole bunch of other cancers, but they're all pretty rare. In the adult population in the United States, there's about 1.6 million cases of cancer that are newly diagnosed every year. In pediatrics, it's about 14,000, so about 1% of all cancers are pediatric cancers. So it's not a very, very common problem, but when it's your child or a child in your community, it's a big, big problem. When we're able to cure children with cancer, we're able to save their entire lives. And so they can have 50, 60, 70 years of productive life ahead of them. And so one of the challenges that we face in the pediatric cancer world is getting funding from the government and from other organizations to be able to do research to understand it better. And so one of the arguments that sometimes people will make is, well, it's only 1% of all cancers. Why should we spend money on that? But the reasons are that, again, you can save an entire life of a child, and that child can grow up to be a doctor or a statistician or a scientist or a president, and so that's worthwhile. But the other thing is that the research that we do in pediatric cancer has led to understanding of cancers that apply to adult cancers as well.
So I'm sure you do have patients coming to you, and when a mom or a dad asks, why did my child get cancer?
So that's the first question that everybody asks. The second question is it contagious? Can my other kids get it? But unfortunately, we don't know what causes most cases of pediatric cancer. We know that there's an association between smoking and lung cancer, and there's associations between exposure to radiation and things like that. But when you have a 2-month-old who gets leukemia, it's really hard to come up with a reason. Or if you have a 5-year-old who gets kidney cancer, they haven't been around long enough generally to be exposed to things that can cause cancer. So the answer is, for most cases, we don't know. One of the things we have been learning is that there is a genetic component or a hereditary component to pediatric cancers more than we ever thought before. There was a study a couple of years ago that suggested that around 8 or 10% of pediatric cancers happen because of some genetic predisposition, something that they've inherited in their genes that makes them more likely to get cancer. And when I did my training 25 or 30 years ago, we didn't think that at all. So now we think it's around 10-ish%. People estimate that genetic predisposition may be responsible for up to 30 or even 40% of pediatric cancers.
Wow, okay. Dr. Krishnamurthy, usually when a child has a fever or has a cold, parents are the first to diagnose, and they know, is it a flu or is it just a cough or a sore throat, right? And then we go with our symptoms and with the child's symptoms and signs to the pediatrician, and they are able to diagnose further. Who actually detects the first signs and symptoms of pediatric cancer? Is it the parents or the oncologists?
Sure. So there's a lot of overlap in how a child might present with any illness. You know, it's a fever, cough, or child is not their usual state of health, right? So the first person to typically find something is the mother, first of all. So as a parent, I want to be very particular about saying the mother for obvious reasons. They would typically go to the emergency room or go to their primary care doctor. So I think one of the educational challenges, as those of us who are in academic medicine, is educating the people that we train for them to think about cancer. So your pediatrician mostly sees the influenza or otitis media, but they're not necessarily thinking about cancer. So that's the awareness. There are sometimes the cancer is diagnosed by grandma because grandma is not living with the family all the time. And so she comes and says, why is that child limping? And what's wrong with that photograph, which, the white of instead of the red reflex, it looks white. So it really, I think, awareness has to be all the time. The other thing is that you interact with your doctor, but you know your child best. So sometimes it needs a gentle, question saying, he's limping. He used to be walking before. He's not walking anymore. And that actually gets the doctor thinking. So I'm not saying you should double check on your doctor, but I think you should trust that you know your child.
What are the common signs and symptoms, if you may?
Sure. So the commonest presentation, as Dr. Wexler mentioned, was, the commonest pediatric cancer is leukemia. So a child with leukemia would have severe anemia, so they would look pale, they'd look tired. They may have a, severe bleed, nosebleed. Often the kinds of things that present with nosebleeds are actually pretty benign. So you don't have to freak out because there is, overlap. You find you're changing the child's diaper or changing his clothes, you feel a lump in the abdomen. You see these lymph nodes, that are swollen. Those are common presentations of a cancer. Or, you see a lump on the leg. There is pain. So children hardly ever have pain that lasts. So if pain lasts and it's not going away, or if it's a headache, they wake up early in the morning without nausea, they're throwing up. So I think that those are anything that looks really out of the ordinary, think about.
Okay, great, thank you. Dr. Singh, I think Dr. Wexler sort of opened up this topic is the differences between childhood and adult cancers. Adults, we talk about breast cancer, lung cancer, colorectal cancer that we normally don't see in children. And also that depends on the drugs that are being developed. Can the children take the adults' drugs or not? What are the key differences between adult cancers and childhood cancers? And if you can look at the audience and answer.
Dr. Wexler already mentioned some of the differences. Clearly, the most common cancers in adults are, lung cancer, breast cancer, colon cancer. Those three are the top three cancers. And usually, lung cancer is due to exposure to tobacco or other asbestos or radon, environmental pollution. So usually, it doesn't happen in young people. It's usually over 50, usually over 60 years of age. Um, so there are similarly, breast cancer happens a little younger age group for the most part, but it has a wide variety of causes, including the genetic causes, as you touched on. Even in adults, about 10% of cancer are genetic. So, but there are more complex. It may not be one gene, but they are more complicated. Some breast cancer, there is a BRCA gene. There are also various other genes like Lynch syndrome. So there are other different genetic influences too. But there's also environmental exposure. So usually in adult cancers, we call it's a double hit hypothesis. That means you may be born with a defect or some genetic predisposition, but unless and until you're exposed to an adverse environment, you don't go on to develop cancer. So a lot of people may be born with a genetic problem, but that doesn't mean that they get cancer unless and until they're exposed to a toxin which is causing the mutation. Whereas, like you explained about the childhood cancer, they may have, during early development of the child, there may be mutations which develop. 10% of them are still genetic, but then others may be some mutations which develop during development of the child, and that could be the cause.
Thank you so much. And Paikar, so when a child is diagnosed with cancer, we all can only imagine, but you've gone through it. So from your experience, how does it impact the family? And what have the resources you've sought out when you first heard?
All right, so definitely hearing those words that your child has cancer, it's like a ton of bricks falling on your head. It's everything the worst thing that you can imagine, right? And I want to just talk a little bit about what was said earlier, that the mother is the one that ends up with the diagnosis. I took my son, he was 8 months old, he had just started daycare, we had moved to Atlanta 1 month ago. So we really knew no one. And I took him for a follow-up after an ear infection. And the day that I was supposed to take him, the week before that, I saw that he had a little purplish area under one eye. And after 2 days, there was another similar spot on under the other eye. And then I'm not a doctor, but I do have a little bit of a health background. I was a dentist in India, and I said, it cannot be bilateral and be nothing, right? He might have, when it was only one, I thought he may have toppled on a set of toys. And when I took him to his pediatrician, they were not paying much attention to it because one of them was really tiny. So that was it took a little bit of nudging, and they asked me questions about, did you leave him in the care of someone new? What is the father's temper like? All of those questions. And then when they did a blood test, they came running out and said, take him to the ER right now. And then that's how we ended up. So definitely, hearing the diagnosis, coming back to your question, the diagnosis it is hard. In that moment, sitting in the ER, when they told me that they gave me 3 different scenarios and each one was worse than the other. My son had neuroblastoma, that they gave me other diagnosis of leukemia and another one of Langerhans cell histiocytosis. And for a moment there, I thought, in one half of my brain was plotting that as soon as this nurse steps out, I'm going to take my child and run out of this door. And as soon as I leave this hospital building, all this would have gone away. And we can just go back to being the way we were. I can focus on feeding him the mashed avocados and what else I was planning. So it was definitely, that's the kind of the impact. And once he was admitted and once we started the treatment, my only question to them was, show me the resources, show me a support group where I want to see a child who has the same condition as my son and has gone to college. I need to see that scenario in order to walk this path. And right now he has been free of the disease for a year. So God has been very blessed.
How did his sibling Zoya react to all that?
That was way more difficult, than anything else, because for a sibling, it's a time of great confusion. What is happening with our little brother? Why is he losing all his hair? Why does he have no eyebrows? Why does he keep throwing up all the time? Why is my mom all the time at the hospital and she's never with me anymore? So that was really challenging. I had to talk to her school counselor and try to understand and if there were any behavioral challenges happening in school. There were times when I bathed her and dressed her up for school in the hospital and sent her home with dad so that she would wake up in the morning and go to school, because we needed some sense of normalcy to come back in her life. And now she's a soldier. Especially she really takes good care of her brother. So.
Very nice to know. Good job, Zoya. Thank you for being here today. So our next question is for Dr. Anna. If you can give her the mic, yes. So Dr. Anna, the outcomes for the pediatric cancer, especially with the adult survivorship, has really improved in the last 50 years because of the improvement in medications and the clinical trials. But the cost of these clinical trials cost in $1 million, right? And especially if any institution is receiving funding for any of these clinical trials, it's a game changer. And because it costs millions of dollars. So why is there less funding for pediatric cancer research?
I think Dr. Wexler hit the nail on the head when he mentioned that adult cancer research is most prevalent, and who are the members of Congress? They are adults. Many of them of an age that they may develop cancer soon, or relatives already have. In my experience as a grant reviewer for NIH for the past 11 years, I've reviewed probably 30 grants a year and maybe a total of 5 pediatric grant applications. So a lot of times pediatric research doesn't even reach the stage of applying for federal funding. That said, there's a lot of support and recognition of this problem among private foundations. And so we get a lot of support from the Pediatric Brain Cancer Foundation because we do brain cancer research. There's a Pediatric Cancer Research Foundation, Alex's Lemonade Stand Foundation, which was founded by the family of a child who died of neuroblastoma, and she set up a lemonade stand to raise money for her own treatment. And so there's a lot of foundation support, which we really rely on a lot, and including local foundations like Big Your Childhood Cancer Foundation. But definitely we need a lot more support from the federal side. There have been a couple of initiatives put forward for focusing specific on pediatric grant applications, but they've only come around once or twice in the past 4 or 5 years. So it's, we basically throw our proposals in with the big pot of the breast cancer and the glioblastoma cancers and hope that they may rise to the top.
So I see that one of the other challenges that you mentioned that needs to be mentioned is because of the prevalence of pediatric cancer, which was like sort of 1%. Is that a challenge as well in analyzing results? Because you need data set to come to conclusions.
So Dr. Oyster might comment on this also. The pediatric cancer research community of scientists are extremely collaborative, and whenever any group generates a data set that they think is going to be helpful to others, it's typically made very rapidly available, either just through contacting them and asking them for collaborations or uploading, for example, gene expression profiles, that kind of thing. So that pediatric cancer research community is very collaborative, and that's a really something we all depend on.
But if I can interrupt for a second.
Sure.
It is a big problem. I mean, it's good that there's not that many cases of pediatric cancer, but the fact that there are very few means it's very difficult to do clinical trials. For neuroblastoma, there's around 300 kids per year diagnosed with neuroblastoma in the whole country. And of those, there's some whose neuroblastomas are low stage, so they're pretty treatable just with surgery or very minimal chemotherapy. There's some who have very advanced stage. And so when you sort of start going down to the different subcategories of a given tumor type, there are very few patients around. And so when we do clinical trials, it can take, an average clinical trial takes at least 12 to 15 years from start to finish in terms of planning the trial out, in terms of enrolling the patients on the study, in terms of finishing all the chemotherapy, all the treatment, and then waiting until we know if they're cured or not. Because ultimately we want to know that the treatment that we're giving is curative. And we don't say a patient is cured until they're 5 years from the end of treatment. And so, and then once you even have all that data, then it has to be written up and presented and published and so on. So an average trial takes 12 to 15 years for something like neuroblastoma. For things that are more common, like leukemia or brain tumors, although brain tumors, when we talk about pediatric brain tumors, there's a whole bunch of different kinds. And so you can't think of pediatric cancer as one disease. It's many, many different diseases for which there are relatively few patients. The way that we've made the advances that we've made, and the advances have been dramatic. So in the 1960s, the cure rates for pediatric acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which makes up about a quarter of all the pediatric cancers that we see, in the 1960s, the cure rates for that were about 10%. Now, the cure rates 50 years later are 90%. And it's not actually because of new drugs or really new combinations of drugs. It's because of, just taking different approaches. But as Dr. Kenny mentioned, it's working together. There's an organization called the Children's Oncology Group that is sponsored and supported by the National Institutes of Health, the NIH. And that group includes about 230 institutions around the country and in Canada and in a couple of other countries. And everybody essentially, except for St. Jude's, but everybody else in the country participates in this children's oncology group. So if your child is diagnosed with neuroblastoma and comes to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, that patient will get the same treatment as if they went to Texas Children's Hospital or Children's Hospital of Philadelphia or Los Angeles Children's Hospital. So the treatments that we give are uniform around the country. This is different from the adult cancer world, and he can comment on that too, where there's so many patients and people have different ideas, and there's so many patients that you can afford to have lots of different trials. But in pediatric oncology, there are not that many patients, and that is something that makes it much more difficult to get funding. The other last thing I'll say is that in addition to the fact that it's only 1% of all pediatric cancers, when Congress hears that, oh, the cure rates are 90% for pediatric ALL, and the cure rates for esophageal cancer are 10% or 20%, they say, well, we should put more money into esophageal cancer research or pancreatic cancer research, areas where they don't do as well. And so we have to fight to really get, to get the money for our research.
Great. I haven't forgotten Dr. Char and Ranjit. I'm coming back to you, but I think Dr. Krishnamurthy wanted to comment.
I echo everything that was said. I was just doing the math. First of all, there's not a competition among cancers, right? So we're not going to have a fight whether we should be funding adult cancer research or pediatric cancer research, because it's all human suffering, and ultimately, as a community, that's what we're trying to do, is alleviate suffering. But I was just doing the math. So when you save a child's life, right, so with leukemia, the personal years of life that you're saving is about 67 years, okay? And you save somebody with breast cancer, important to do, you're saving 16 years. Okay, so it's 4 times the amount of personal years of life. The amount of funding for breast cancer research, and this was 2009, so I don't know what it is currently, was 19 times that of funding for all of pediatric cancer. So who makes these decisions? Ultimately, all of us do, as advocates, as voters. So I think we all have a responsibility, and our job is to create awareness.
Definitely. I think as we move on, we'll be discussing advocacy as well. And so Dr. Char, Ayurveda, yoga, Chinese medicine, herbalism, and Reiki, and all those alternative or complementary medicine, you're very passionate, especially about yoga and meditation.
Yeah.
And WHO, the World Health Organization, has also asked medicine to integrate with the traditional and the complementary medicine to improve affordability, efficacy, and safety for patients. How do you advocate your message to the mainstream management for pediatric cancers?
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. Cancer in children is absolutely mind-boggling and traumatic to the parents, as she was saying. It's amazing why it can happen. So some of the suggestions were maybe it's because of DNA, some typos in the DNA and that kind of stuff. And recently in June, it was my good fortune to attend a conference in Harvard Medical School in Boston, and they were talking about what Ayurveda and yoga can do for cancer. Of course, they didn't talk about cancer in children, but then one of the most brilliant suggestions was by one Dr. Sharma, and there's another author of the book. They came out with a book. It's if I remember the name, DNA is epigenetics. Epigenetics is a new name they've come up with, and they're gathering a lot of information how, if we change the ecosystem in which the children are brought up, in which we are ourselves living, then it can have some kind of impact on cancers. And some of the anecdotal evidences that you get, which of course nobody takes, the FDA won't care for it. They go for nestering, as they call it, because Nestor was one of the people who drove only at 50 miles per, he was a FDA director or something, who always went at the speed limit of 50 miles, regardless what the highest speed limits were. And people were getting annoyed with his going at 50 miles, even in the fast lanes. But he says, look, I got to take care of myself and the security of everybody else, so I'm going at only 50 miles. That's called, so he gave that name nestering for any kind of new drug that can come out to help people. So that's one of the reasons charges made against the FDA. They're all very slow in their statistical analysis and things like that, and they take years and years to come out with new drugs. But this particular session I attended at Harvard Medical School, there, the Sharma and another author came out with a new book, DNA, Epigenetics, and they were telling us, they're giving us concrete evidences how, even if there are typos in your genes, it'll be possible through proper ecosystems to overcome those things, and how you can infiltrate the tumors and things like that with new T cells, which can kill all that kind of tumor, and then how it can reduce the tumors. They were very passionate about that kind of presentation, and we were hearing, and there were a lot of anecdotal evidences there again. And in India, for example, there's a lot of work going on. Unfortunately, there's no documentation. If you go to a regional cancer center in Kerala, Thiruvananthapuram, and also in Valsad, in Gujarat, people who have been passed life sentence on them have gone there, and through Gomutra and things like that, Panchagavya, they have been able to cure them complete, no traces of cancer in them after so many years. I think in one case it was about 18 months. The person had no trace of cancer in it through Gomutra. But then when we tell all this anecdotal evidence, people say, hey, that's hogwash. We don't believe that. Only there must be clinical evidence. So clinical evidence, like he was saying, it takes about 10 years, 15 years for them to publish all that kind of evidence. But why not give it a chance? And also you have nestering here. So I feel in severe cases like children's cancer, the first charge against them should be some Panchagavya or something like that, Ayurvedic medicines. And then if you fail there, always you always have the option of chemotherapy and radiation therapy and things like that.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back for other rebuttals. But Ranjit, you are an IT person. Why are you here?
Exactly.
I would say you're delivering hope.
No.
But,
I have been thinking about that since I sat down here. I was thinking I get some company from Piker, but she's a dentist too. So that I'm the only non-medical professional on this table. But I think the reason I'm here partially is because of you, Nazira. Thank you very much for giving us this platform. Access Life is trying to solve a small speck of the problem that we're talking about today. And I think the panelists have already done enough to raise the key aspects of the challenge that we're all dealing with, right? We talked about the difference between the amount of funds that is and can go for pediatric cancer treatment. It's only a percentage of 1 to 3% of the total research funding goes there. Second, the Piker talked about the challenges that the family faces. Now, all this we are talking in an American context. We are here, thanks to God that we are relatively well-to-do. But what happens if the same scenario happens in a developing country, in a village, in a family where they're basically just managing their life and they're able to meet the demands of the family by working throughout the day, and their child has cancer. Now it multiplies the problem multifold. And the opportunity that we have, now we are sitting here, we have a stage full of doctors. When we go to a village, there are no doctors there. There is nobody to even diagnose the problem. They obviously, all of them have the lucky mother who is there to see that there is a problem, but what happens next? How do you diagnose the problem? How do you understand this is cancer? And when that happens, where do you go for treatment? You go to the cities for treatment. And the interesting fact is, all that we talked about in terms of medical costs of treating cancer is still only about 50 to 55% or 60% at best of the overall cost of treating a child who's diagnosed with cancer. 40 to 45% is non-medical costs. The cost of recuperation, cost of nutrition, taking care of the child, taking him to the hospital and back, getting close to the hospital enough to be able to give the child a fair chance to get treatment regularly. And so these families from these villages come to Bombay in India or to the cities, and that's when a fresh layer of challenges start off. They don't know anybody there. The cost of living close to these hospitals is prohibitive. It is maybe 4, 5, 10 times what they earn in a month. And how do then they do it? Even if they were to do it, they would sell their property, get back and try to make that work. Their life back, even after the child survives, is never the same again. So what does a parent do? He decides, he has a very, very tough choice. Do I take care of this child who is sick? Or do I take care of my rest of my family? Now, we don't want to be in that choice situation at all. We never do want to be. And that's where I think some friends of ours in Bombay identified the possibility and the need to help these families. And we actually provide them a place to live in Bombay as long as the child is undergoing treatment. Now, remember one thing, that it's a child, so you need both parents to be there. They've already lost their source of income because they are probably a farmer in a village or a daily laborer. And so they've lost their income. They have this child, they're in a new city where the cost of living is much higher than they've ever been used to. So that is the situation we are dealing with. Even if the child does get the treatment, there are many, many other issues that the family is dealing with. So we provide them that opportunity. And I was lucky to get introduced to this organization a few years ago. It's just 4 years old. The organization is 4 years old. We started our first center in 2014 and can house about 8 kids. That's when we started. I got involved in 2015. And if I had asked the team then, Gopal, Parvinder, etc., what would we be doing 4 years from now? He probably would have said we would have opened 2 centers more or 3 centers more. We have 8 families. We'll be probably at 20 families. But the need for this support is so high that it's exploded. We have actually 6 centers. We are able to support 63 families at a time. And remember, when I say 63 families, they live with us for 3, 6, 8, sometimes more than a year, in many, many months. And so we have been able to directly impact more than 150 families and children. The survival rate of these children, this collection is upwards of 99%, of course, dependent on the stage at when the diagnosis happened, etc. So we have actually been able to make an impact. But based on the challenges the rest of the panels talked about, there is a long, long way to go. And I keep saying this, we are still at the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we can do. That's why I'm here.
Sure, thank you so much. That was very well put. Just to put it in context, because of the support system and the resources available in America, 80% of children diagnosed go into remission. But in sub-Saharan Africa, 90% of those diagnosed with cancer do not survive. So definitely, how can we make this more global effort in supporting the developed countries as well? So thank you, Ranjit. Dr. Krishnamurthy, the treatment for pediatric cancer, right, is multifold. If you can tell the audience in our terms that we can understand, when does chemotherapy, when does radiotherapy, and what are the new molecular or targeted interventions that's talked about nowadays? If you can just enlighten us with the treatment modalities when a person is diagnosed with cancer.
So I first want to, if I may, enlarge a little bit on what Ranjit said, because I trained in India and I actually continue to work over there. 25% of the patients can go to a corporate hospital and will leave without getting any treatment. Well, 25% will only get the treatment because they just can't afford it. If you've been to New Delhi, if you go to the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, if you go at 6:30 in the evening, and just stand there and watch, people come up in a van, and they have this big vessel with puri and vegetable. And there are 1,000 people who line up to get that meal because they can't afford it. And these are middle-class folks and who've sold everything to come and be with their child. So, wonderful work.
Good job.
So as Dr. Wexler said, we made dramatic improvements in curing children with cancer. And most of it is because we are almost unique in being able to work with each other, pediatric cancer doctors. And that's really, we're very proud of saying that. But now, we're in a different world. Because chemotherapy is a cellular poison. It kills cancer, but it doesn't have a brain. It kills anything in its site. And so chemotherapy doesn't distinguish between cancer and other cells that are dividing rapidly in your body, like the cells in the root of your hair, the cells lining your mouth and intestine, the cells in your bone marrow. So there's all this collateral damage, if you will. And now with all of the advances, because of wonderful work like Dr. Anna are doing, is we know molecular targets and we can make smart bombs. And of course, a lot of them more are done now by pharmaceutical industry for adult, but some of them come from adult cancer, and some, have other targets in pediatric cancer. So for the longest time, we got chemotherapy, surgery, and mostly surgery is, we used to give chemotherapy, shrink the tumor, then take it out. When I was in college, you first went and cut out the cancer. That's what surgeons used to do. And I was, as a final year medical student, when my professor said, well, the day will come when I will not be the important person. It'll be the medical doctor, not the surgical doctor. So surgery is actually a smaller part of cancer treatment now, because first, for several of the tumors, we shrink the tumor, take it out, and then we give more chemotherapy. As an adjunct to this, we also give radiation, which acts locally. So this is how sort of chemotherapy, surgery, and for blood cancers we don't do surgery, but for solid tumors like neuroblastoma or tumors of the bone, and sometimes for different other tumors. Increasingly, what is happening is that these new molecules are getting integrated up front. So you can't take a treatment that you've done for 30 years and throw it out and say, we're not going to do it that way, we're going to do it some other way. We actually have to nester. And we have to introduce the new treatments for people who failed everything. Because first we're trying to figure out, is this safe? What dose to give it at? And then we gradually move it up to moving it up front. So increasingly, those smart bombs, these smart medicines are coming up front. There are times, and these smart bombs might actually be combinations of an antibody, means an antibody is something that identifies that particular molecular target, and a toxin. And that toxin could be a form of radiation. And so those are actually now coming up front, even for some neuroblastoma. Typically, bone marrow transplant is reserved for people who've had either cancer come back, or it looks like they're not going to do well. It's simply a question of balancing your risk versus benefit. You know, if the risk is higher, you're more likely to offer a riskier treatment up front. So bone marrow transplant is a more intensive type of chemotherapy, and getting a bone marrow from either themselves or from another person, and if you get it from somebody else, you have to make sure that immunologically they're going to work together. So typically we don't do bone marrow transplant up front, except in severe cases. So I hope that answers.
Yes, yes. So basically you're saying the last form of the treatment is the bone marrow transplant. You have the chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and then the bone marrow transplant if it doesn't work?
Either that, or you can predict that this person will need more intensive treatment, and so they will get the bone marrow transplant according to the initial planned treatment.
Okay, great. So I also want to let you know, when you were arriving, I just mentioned the Seva Vaswani Center is here for getting matched. So I'm going to sign up as soon as we finish the program. So I'll take the lead in signing up to become a donor. So thank you for being here. And Dr. Wexler, communication is the key. And as adults, we still suffer in communicating to our spouses, to our kids. Communicating a bad news is very hard. We go in euphemisms, and we try not to be straight because we can't see the hurt in parents. How have you adapted or adopted in conveying those messages to parents?
So it's one of the most important parts of what we do. And one of the things that's maybe a little bit different about pediatrics versus adults is that we generally try to be honest about what is going on, and we will use words like your child has cancer, or your child is likely to survive, or your child is not likely to survive. We say that up front because we feel that it's really important to be honest with people, because if you're not, then it's much harder to deal with, and so we want to prepare people. Fortunately, with an over 80% cure rate for many pediatric cancers, we don't have to say some of the negative things as often, but we're always upfront about the fact that it is a journey, and even if the cure rate for a particular cancer is 95%, it still means that 5% of people don't make it, and we are not smart enough yet to know how to identify which are going to be the 5% and which are going to be the 95%. So we try to be honest, we try to be upfront. We spend a fair bit of time training young doctors in how to actually communicate bad news. And when I was in my training, we didn't do it as much. Now we're doing it much more. And there are specialists particularly in palliative care, when it's clear that we're not going to be able to save a child, that there are doctors who focus on making children comfortable and focusing on things that are important, recognizing that we're not going to be able to cure. We have sessions with these doctors in training where there are actors who are patients, who pretend to be patients, and they say that they act like they're the parent, and then the training doctor is in front of them and faces the situation. They're videotaped. We have feedback sessions with them. We just had one of these about 2 or 3 weeks ago that was very, very well received, and it's a way to try to model how to do it. One of the things that's really important to recognize is that you can't have just one approach. You have to have different approaches to different families. Some families may have a very high level of understanding. I've had patients whose parents are physicians, and I've had families where the parents don't even speak English. And particularly in Georgia and Atlanta, about a quarter of our patients are Hispanic only speaking. And so you can imagine having a discussion in your native language and their native language, how difficult that is. When you have to go through an interpreter, it takes twice as long, and it's really difficult because you don't know if they're communicating the same sense of what you want. So it's an area that's really, really important. We recognize that it's important. We're trying to work on it. There's some people who are better than others at it, and again, we try to sort of make them better. But it's a really, really key critical area.
I was going to ask you, so is cultural competency one of the part of the training as well?
Yeah. And again, when you're in a place as large and cosmopolitan as Atlanta, where there are people from all over the place, we've had people, again, from all over the world. We have interpreters for some of the more common languages, but for some of the less common ones, it becomes a challenge. But you have to be able to deliver news in the context of what people can appreciate and what they understand. And you know, you just have to tailor your message to the family. I mean, I can go on and talk for an hour or 2 hours about leukemia, but if the family is not going to be understanding of it, at least right off the bat, you have to kind of just do it in a measured way. But communication is key in every field, and it's particularly key in our field.
Very nice. Dr. Anna, the question for you is, we already agreed that it's a challenge to conduct research with the minimal data sets with the pediatric cancer population. How important is it to nurture the infrastructure and collaborations? And do we have the ability to strengthen our partnerships with across or around the world in Asian countries or the African countries?
Do you mean between researchers or between researchers?
Researchers to collect more data fields.
So there are a couple of consortia
Can you?
that have been recently established that are global.
Okay.
One of them is called MAGIC. It was developed by Michael Taylor at the University of Toronto. And so, for example, if you have or you know of physicians or researchers in those countries that would be interested in collaborating, he's very accessible and easy to reach out to. There are a couple of, for my specific area of study, brain tumors, there are several national and international meetings that are well attended by scientists from all over the world. One just happened, the International Society for Pediatric Neuro-Oncology, and that alternates between being in the US and being somewhere else every year. So it is, as long as people want to collaborate and are willing to reach out, there's a great degree of interest, especially as it pertains to obtaining patient samples, because for me as a basic researcher in the lab, it's very difficult, even in Atlanta with a very large pediatric brain tumor population, because of some logistical difficulties that I won't go into here. But in terms of getting samples to these consortia for analyzing their gene expression profile, tissue microarrays that can then be made public, that's the way to go.
So I know you are the director for the basic research program. So if you can tell our audience, what does that pertain to the basic research program, and what do you do on a daily basis?
Actually, it's not basic research program, it's basic neuro-oncology research.
Neuro-oncology research program, yes.
5 years ago, before I came to Atlanta,
You can look at the audience.
they recognized that there was a strength in Emory's pediatrics in terms of leukemia and lymphoma, and in developing strength in research in pediatric neuro-oncology. But they wanted someone to kind of come in and pull that together, because the researchers were primarily clinicians with, seeing patients as well as trying to do research. The last thing they needed was another hurdle to deal with. And so I came and brought my lab with me from Vanderbilt, and we worked it out so that we and the neuro-oncology researchers that are also clinicians are in the same open lab space. So when those guys are in the clinic, me and several other new recently recruited basic researchers are available to help their people at the lab on a daily basis. And then we can also interact with them in terms of getting access to patient data that we may not be able to readily access on our own. What I do on a daily basis is I write grants a lot and submit grants. I go over research results with the team in my lab. I work with my students that I have two that are now preparing to graduate with their PhD, and they're anxious to wrap that up, so we're working together to tie up their projects. And also just developing new ideas, talking to colleagues, reading papers, looking at the next big question that we might want to try to answer, even though you never really answer the question you thought you were going to answer, because it raises more questions. So no project is ever really done. But it's fun and it's exciting, and I really like being in the lab among people, so I keep an open door and I go out and talk to people and look at their results together and discuss their experiments, and really keep a hands-on approach to running the lab. And I think that we've done some good work. We published some nice papers recently and getting ready to publish a few more. And then, of course, in terms of bringing together the whole neuro-oncology program, we started what we call the Pediatric Neural Tumors Working Group, which are a variety. I think we're up to about 10 labs now at Emory that have some interest in pediatric neuro-oncology. And we meet once a month as PIs to discuss how we could maybe collaborate and work on grants together. And then once a month, we meet as a whole group where trainees from the lab will give short presentations. So we can either give them feedback because they're getting ready for a job interview, or they're preparing a poster for a poster session, or, you know, feedback that they would not get just within their own lab because they've got a set of 10 different labs looking at their project now that might have some different use to it. And that's also led to several productive collaborations and joint grant applications and publications, especially with our colleagues Toby McDonald and Dolores Hammartsumian, who are in the neuro-oncology program together with me.
Thank you so much for the elaboration. So, Piker, the resources for self-care, right? Counseling, support group, complementary medicine. Did you explore counseling? Did you go for counseling? Who answered your questions like, will my child go to school? Will he have to return for treatment once it's done? Just the basic questions that parents have answers to for their kids all the time. And am I right that is this the first time you're coming out in public and speaking about? Thank you for doing
Thank you for that
today.
question. Because a lot, first of all, I want to say that, you know, this point has been mentioned before. Like even with the work that we're doing with Access Life, we're helping in those countries because in my experience here, you know, you, Dr. Wexler, are from Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, which is like a second home to my kids. The hospital, the system in place, the social worker, the child life specialist, like you had so many resources and so many people that you could count on. At all hours of the day, there were volunteers walking in and out. You know, they were here to take my older one out for a little painting or something, you know, that she could do to stay engaged and not feel like we are in this closed place where the blood drip is flowing or the chemo is going and it's a dark, dingy place. No, it's not. So the resources that we have here are fabulous. The hospital is so great. At one point, we had to go to a different hospital for completely unrelated. And my kids were like, can we just go back to Choa? Like, you guys know, right? Those are hospitals. So definitely. And in terms of resources, the social worker gave us a huge packet. It had all of the resources that we could apply for. There were some that would apply only for certain income groups. There were others that apply to everyone. In the state of Georgia, there's Georgia Medicaid for cancer patients who have an active port, irrespective of their income bracket. So that was really helpful, like all of those resources. There was a child life specialist that comes in. There are volunteers that come help. Mine was a baby. He was diagnosed at 8 months. But there are other kids who are in that ward who are school-going age. So being able to continue a little bit of learning is also, you know, something that you could totally overlook in the grand scheme of things of overcoming cancer. But for a kid, that's what they do. They play and they learn, and that's their normal life. So having all of those resources were available. That's really great. And then outside of the hospital, I try to join as many support groups as I can. Even now, even through Facebook, you know, we're part of Neuroblastoma Survivors Group. And then other mom groups where a lot of times when somebody is diagnosed, they post it online anonymously. So when I see a post for childhood cancer, I reach out to the admin and say, you can give my information to this mom so she can reach out to me offline. And so now behind the scenes, we have a connection. So if somebody says this person has a certain kind, I know that this other mom has gone through it. You know what, better than me, I'm a neuroblastoma mom. Why don't you connect with an ALL mom? She'll be able to give you the right perspective. So we've kind of developed our own connections as well, but definitely support, having people to answer your questions, all of that helps a lot.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Just to add that that's one of the things. I mean, Jada mentioned that 40% of the funds are spent on non-medical issues, and when a child comes to us with newly diagnosed with cancer, we spend a lot of time focused on how we're going to make this better in terms of a medical approach. But as you mentioned, there's a whole nother probably half of the effort needs to be spent on taking care of the child, the siblings, the parents, and you mentioned the social worker, the child life people. There's play therapy, there's music therapy, there's pet therapy. We actually have a team of 9 or 10 psychologists as part of AFLAC who are there to help patients get through, manage pain issues, manage coping issues with the diagnosis. I mean, you know, your son was 8 months old, but we have patients who are teenagers who are getting ready to go off to college. And you can imagine that being told, you know, you can't go to college because you have lymphoma or something, it is devastating to them. And so having this kind of support is something that AFLAC does really, really well. It's one of the reasons that I actually moved here about a year ago, because I've been at other hospitals where it pales in comparison the things that we're able to offer here. It's a huge, huge aspect of their care, and it's something that, again, you have to deal with the medical things, but you have to also deal with the psychosocial parts.
Definitely. I was
Nazira,
gonna-
can I just react to that quickly?
Yes.
So one of the interesting things that so obviously when we took on this cause, it was new to most of the people from within Access Life India who were trying to figure out the modalities of working with the hospital, modalities of working with the patients who are coming and their families. The very interesting thing is, while we thought about the transportation to the hospital, they thought about the nutrition, thought about providing them a clean place to live, the part that we all missed, but is an amazing byproduct, is just that you're living in a room where the next room is another parent who's having a child who's going through this and is probably a few months into it. And imagine what it would have been otherwise for that parent, right, or for that family. They did not have that choice. In India, we don't have this network that Piker was talking about. We don't have that network. So this was an amazing byproduct that is now probably the biggest service we provide to these families in addition to the financial aspect of it.
That's really
And I'll
good to
just
hear.
add one thing, that when you start meeting other people who have gone through something, in your eyes, I might be the disadvantaged parent, but now I can sit here and count my blessings. You know, there are so many different types. There are so many different people have gone through so much more than that. And now I say, thank God we were diagnosed with this type and that level of, you know, whatever that is. That is our new normal. So just want to.
Thank you. That makes sense. Dr. Wexler, I was going to ask a follow-up question, but you don't have to answer. Do you have yoga therapy and Ayurveda at AFLAC Center?
Not that I'm aware of. There's relaxation therapy, and there's people who come in and help, but
Yes. So I think it's really important. So I'm not a yoga expert, okay? And you can look at me and see that. So yoga means union, right? So it's just balance. So an important goal of treatment is quality of life. You can be cured of cancer, and if you don't have any quality of life, what good is that? The other thing is that there are patients who are in pain, and we're throwing pain medicines at them, and that's making them feel, you know, they're like, okay, I'd rather live with the pain than with the pain medicine. So there is a big role for this, and actually we're doing research in yoga. So I actually called my mom, you know, who got cancer last year, and I was like, okay, I think for certain things, yoga has a role to play. You just have to go to the right people and think through all of those things.
If I
Great,
can add a
thank
footnote,
you.
just a footnote to all this discussion. My interest in treatment of cancer with yoga was
Dr. Shah, can you-
driven, what happened was, I was reading New Yorker magazine. There was this article by William Fair, an oncologist, who worked with Sloan Kettering Memorial Hospital in New York. And he wrote, I had a choice. I mean, he was well versed in Ayurveda and yoga himself, though he was an oncologist. And he comes down with colon cancer himself. So what happens? He says, I had a choice. All my colleagues at the Kettering Memorial said, go for chemotherapy, go for radiation therapy. I opted for yoga, he says. And then, it's all there in the article he's written. I sent that paper to Dr. Shishi Sharma at one time, about 20 years ago. So he says, after going for yoga, no chemotherapy, nothing, this sometime in the 70s, 80s maybe. He was having more energy than ever before. Then he saw more patients than ever before. He took time off to spend quality time with his family. And on top of it, he said, I even find time to go for diving in the seas. So that kind of thing. So that so much more energy he said he came to have. What yoga does basically is it shifts the stress. You have a fight and flight syndrome. Whenever there's a stressful situation, and stress is basically the main cause for about 80 to 90% of all diseases, as you know. So what yoga does, it transfers the stress shock to the autonomous nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, instead of the sympathetic system taking the fight and flight syndrome. So much so, it's like whenever you feel there's a stressful situation, you're not perturbed at all. And there are no biochemical changes in your body because of that. And so what happens is basically when you're driving your car, you don't tell Ms. Spiker, apply brakes now. You don't tell yourself that. It happens automatically. So you deal with stress just by second nature. It becomes part of your routine life. So that's what parasympathetic system takes over rather than sympathetic system. That's the greatest attribute of yoga. And that's why we request people to do yoga. And yoga creates a kind of new ambience, a new outlook in life, completely. It's a kind of new scientific way of living. Like nature, means you're going back to nature as much as possible. And living as nature intended your body to be lived, and life to be lived.
We can definitely see your passion for yoga, and I would love to learn more in the future as well. So Dr. Singh and others, how many of you all remember those big phones in the last 20 years ago, the big phones and the big desktops, right? But if someone carried that big phone today, we would all stare, right? What's happening? We have smartphones and these small phones and wristwatches. Why are we holding on to that big phone? So similarly, because of the evolvement of technologies. Similarly with the evolvement of medications and clinical trials and new treatment, how important is it, since funding seems to be one of the challenges, how important is it for public-private partnerships to look at new modalities of treatment, collaborating with Georgia Tech institutions to see if there are any technology available, either for supportive services improvement, quality of life, or even for the treatment aspect using technology for cancer treatment?
No, that's a very good question and very relevant in today's world. And given, like Dr. Krishnamurthy was telling us, that making antibody conjugates with toxins, so all these things, and like basic science research, they're publishing data. All this we couldn't have imagined in the past. So nowadays, advent of immunotherapy, CAR T-cell therapy, so these are all where you're basically taking the T-cells from the patient, priming it to cancer, delivering it back to the patient, and it's all your own cells which are helping to fight this cancer. So all these are novel technologies which were not there before. We talk about yoga stimulating T-cells. It's the same way, we have different techniques there. In the end, they're your own immune system stimulating and then giving it back to the patients to help fight the cancer. You can think of these as natural ways. We are actually, even in adult medicine, we are now moving away from chemotherapy to using all these new modalities. And they will reduce the side effects, be more targeted. They will generate different set of side effects. They have actually, side effects which are different than chemotherapy. And some of them can be serious too, because your immune system is very strong. It can, if you make them hyper, it can attack normal tissues too. So it can also have similar side effects. But there are so many novel technologies. There is Duke published in GBM which is one of the adult brain tumor. I mean, they inserted polio virus directly into the tumor, and they had complete remission in certain patients. And they published study, actually came on 60 Minutes, and everybody was calling Duke the next day. I want this therapy. So all these are novel, basic science generated, technology generated. I mean, mapping of the brain, how you can deliver the treatment directly into the tumor cells. Like we talked about, conjugating radiation molecule with the like PSA, and in prostate cancer we have radium-223, in which there's a radiation molecule tagged to the antibody or antigen against prostate cancer, and you just inject and it goes directly into the cancer cells and kills them. So there are, the list goes on and on. There are so many new novel technologies which are coming out. I was reading, like, when I graduated from fellowship about 12 years ago, we had 5 or 6 new drugs coming out, and we would cheer, oh my goodness. I was just reading an article yesterday about all the new drugs approved over the last year. There were like 100 drugs in 1 year, as opposed to 5 or 6 drugs 10 years ago. And it's multiplying. It's not today. This year was 150. Next year there'll be 300. So the pace has picked up so much, and part of it is, people making new hearing aids. And all these Georgia Tech. I know of some students in Georgia Tech developing such tiny microchip hearing aids. There's so much integration of humans with the computers now, which is going on. This will revolutionize our future. So regarding public-private, I think, like the other guests alluded to, there is a lot of NIH funding which happens, and also private industry which funds them. Obviously, it's a challenge in the pediatric population, but I think there will be enough interest, because it'll come. So our kids are so smart. When I read their papers or go to any poster presentation in Georgia Tech, Emory, even in our conferences, when I go there, poster sessions, and I see them, they're so amazing ideas. People detecting cancers with drop of blood, or even non-invasive ways. Nowadays, iPhones has so much technology. You can monitor heart rate, sleep study. You can do all kinds of things and diagnose diseases just carrying. This morning I went for my walk. It tells me everything. My heart rate was this. I walked 10,000 steps. Giving me all kinds of information. I burned this many calories, in detecting diseases too. So I think the cost will eventually come down with the advent of technology. So I think our future is bright. I think initially cost will go up before they all come down and competition starts, and it eventually comes down. So I'm hopeful for the future, I think, with the advent of all these new techniques and technology. So I'm actually looking forward to my old age.
Thank you.
If I may, I'd just like to take that question about public-private partnership. Okay, so the failure rate of good ideas is about 90%. Okay? So somebody has to be able to be ready to fail 90% of the time. It costs about $1 billion to bring one drug to market. Okay, so what actually happens is smart people like Anna do all the research and come up with the idea, and then there's a company that'll come and invest money and actually do the clinical trial. The government, which is you and I, has an important role to play, is incentivize those companies to invest in that kind of research and even take it to children. Because the cost-benefit ratio completely changes when the appropriate incentives are there. And I want to slightly deviate from your question. So I believe we don't know everything, right? Everything is not an allopathic medicine. 25 years ago, I remember somebody, a microbiologist had a daughter in our practice in Minneapolis who had 60 days after transplant had a recurrence of this rare type of leukemia called acute promyelocytic leukemia. So she said, there was really nothing we could offer. And she said, I'm taking my child to China to treat her with arsenic. And we really sort of, had a hard time not laughing at her. Today, we're actually giving arsenic as upfront treatment. And literally upfront treatment. And this was a Chinese, ethnic medicine, and somebody was doing it, and a professor went and saw this and took this back to Beijing and actually analyzed this. Because I actually, on a sideline, I read Sanskrit, I have read some of the Ayurvedic texts. So there's probably, and there are some of the things I've been impressed by. So there's probably things there that could be evaluated, but it has to be done right.
Right.
You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, is my recommendation. We're curing 80% of pediatric cancers and, 90% of leukemias. I would go with that, and I'd certainly look into those things.
And I agree with your, adult and working together, adult and pediatric population, because we use a lot of protocols of pediatrics, like sarcoma protocols, which is sarcoma is like a muscle and connective tissue cancers. So because of such a high rate of cure in pediatrics, we use a lot of protocols of pediatrics because our adult rate was not very good. So we, right out of their textbook, adopted their protocols and put it into our patients and have, relatively better results. So, and it's the same, so a lot of these treatments go back and forth between pediatrics and adults. It's not, it's not different. And it's an evolving field. So we are learning from them, they're learning from us.
Definitely.
One quick reaction as well. So I never thought I would bring up this example today because I didn't see the connection till this conversation happened. But my son is a senior in high school, and last year, in the junior year, he had an opportunity to do an internship in Georgia Tech. I'm a mechanical engineer by education, and he wanted to do it in the mechanical engineering department. I don't consider that hereditary, but it happens. So he wanted me to go along with him to talk to his prospective mentor in Georgia Tech, because he doesn't know anything about mechanical engineering except a few things, and he wanted my support. Honestly, 15 minutes into the conversation, I had no idea what this lady was talking about. Seriously, I mean, she's in the mechanical engineering department doing research, and she was talking about, her conversation in the third sentence was about a blood clot, and I lost her. From that point, I lost her, because she's talking about how they are researching the mechanical tensile properties of platelets, and I'm going beyond my field of expertise, but about how that is, you can study that and understand how you can use mechanical particles in our blood system instead of drugs, which is basically chemicals. And I said, Diana, why are you doing this? How does this help? And she says, 10, 15, 20 years from now, you might have drugs that are mechanical particles sent into your body that can influence the speed, the certainty of a blood clotting. And the key thing is, it doesn't get consumed. A chemical drug gets consumed, you need to take another dosage the next day, and the next day, this mechanical particle will remain there. I was blown away. If you can think of a confluence of technology or engineering into bioengineering, or I don't even know what this field is called, but it's amazing.
We actually already do have a lot of drugs which are using this property. So like there's a drug Abraxane and paclitaxel. So they have made a nanoparticle paclitaxel, which is it's the same drug, but it can penetrate into the drug like 10 times higher dose. Same drug we give in the generic form versus this nanoparticle bound drug. It has much better penetration through the cell wall into the tumors and has much higher and has a higher success rate in lung cancer, breast cancer. So we're already using nanotechnology, probably generated from Georgia Tech or I don't know where.
Definitely.
One little thing. I
Dr.
think,
Charth, you can keep the mic.
yeah,
Yes.
most of you, I think, have seen this movie we saw about 3 decades ago, Dirty Dozen, about how these people who are condemned in prisons and all in America are sent in the Second World War, and they infiltrate behind the enemy lines and cause enormous destruction, which facilitates the win of the Allied forces against Nazi Germany and other people. No, same, you know, contrast can be there with regard to how these nucleotides, simple forms, can infiltrate into the tumors and destroy the tumors. I think the latest, there's a, I went to an oncologist's home yesterday for lunch, and she was reading that magazine, Lancet magazine. And the Lancet magazine carried a special feature on oncology, et cetera, et cetera. And in that, they're giving complete description, the editorial columns themselves, they're giving descriptions how it can infiltrate the tumors and destroy the tumors. So I was fascinated by that. Similarly, I mean, different modalities of the Ayurveda is one modality for curing. Allopathy is another modality. Unani is another system. So my request to people is don't live in silos without windows. I don't have any time to look into what Ayurveda is doing. I don't have time to see what yoga is doing. I don't have time for these two people. I don't have time what allopathy is doing. No, no, no. Please don't have that kind of a silo mentality, mindset. Instead, have an open mind. And for example, if in Surat, this person had a sentence, life sentence on him. He said, sorry, that's the end of all treatment. He goes to his hometown in Gujarat. His name is Vaidya, by the way, Atul Vaidya, a PhD in economics. And he goes to a small little village, and there he goes to this place where Panchagavya, only cow urine is given. I mean, don't laugh at it. It kind of morbid kind of thing, because how can you drink cow urine? But in Parsi weddings, by the way, the bride and the bridegroom are given a little bit of Panchagavya, or cow urine, to drink on a wedding day. Can you believe that? So that happens on that kind of thing because of the medicinal properties of the urine. And it has to be a desi cow, not not a American cow with the hormone injections and that kind of stuff. All right? So it has to be a desi cow, and the cure rate they claim is 80% for all kinds of cancers.
So,
So-
Dr. Char, I do hope that some of the research where it can be proved as evidence-based happens, and
Yeah.
we'll discuss it soon. So
That's
thank
one-
you for that.
Oh, yeah, one
example.
weakness is documentation sucks a little bit. It's not as good a documentation as you have in America, but it works.
Definitely. Thank you. So the next question is for Dr. Wexler and Dr. Singh, if you can sort of tag team with the answer. Many years ago, when I used to work with UNC Chapel Hill Hospitals, I formed the baseline data for initiating palliative care department or a division. What does palliative care mean? And should you introduce that to the patients or parents as soon as they come in? Or basically, how important is psychosocial care? And is kindness and empathy taught in medicine schools nowadays?
I mean, we can argue about whether you can teach kindness and empathy. You can sort of make people aware of it, but some people are more teachable than others. So palliative care is usually thought of as care that you give at the end of life. But that's actually not true, and we're trying to change what people think of when we say palliative care. Palliative care is taking care of symptoms of any condition, and we tend to think of it at end of life, but it really isn't. So to answer that part of your question, we actually do introduce palliative care. A lot of places don't call themselves palliative care specialists. They call them quality of life specialists, and that is introduced right up front. So even if you have something where the cure rate is 90%, we say, the cure rate's 90%, but there is a chance that you might be in the 10% that are not going to make it. And we are not going to abandon you at that point. We're going to focus on your symptoms, on the quality of your life. And that's something that happens throughout treatment. And again, every patient is a little bit different in terms of what they want. And it's very important to discuss with the families, with the patients themselves, if they're old enough to understand what their goals of care are. And some people, when faced with a terrible, terrible outcome, may say, no, I want to fight and I want to do as much as I possibly can. Other patients will say, you know what, I want to just focus on the quality of life that I have remaining. If that's 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years, I just want to focus on that and do things that make me happy. And so every patient is a little bit different. So palliative care, psychosocial care, paying attention to what the patient is actually saying, what the patient is feeling, is incredibly important. And we do try to make people aware of that. It's a little bit hard to teach them.
Very nice. Dr. Singh, so basically Dr. Wexler said listening to the parents is very important. Is that the same with the adult population as well?
Yes, I know he mentioned earlier that I try to be honest with the patients. I do the same. So you just, cancer is a field where you have to be honest with the patient. Unfortunately, in adult medicine, this topic comes a lot more than in pediatric population because our cancers are, less than 50% curable. So this is a frequent topic which comes up and really doesn't come up enough up front where it should. We do have a palliative care department and palliative care physicians in our hospital. We are lucky to have the department. And basically what palliative care is, what makes you happy, what is your goal of life and treatment. And but honesty can sometimes be divided into stages. We first ask the patient, how much do you want to know up front? Or, some people want to know every detail of their disease, and some say, no, don't tell me everything. I will grasp as the disease goes on. But I think it is an important aspect because it lets them focus on what's important in life, because we know, yes, we may be able to give them 6 more months of life or 12 more months of life, but eventually the disease will take over. So, and some patients take it in stride and do what they enjoy the most. I had a recent patient with metastatic pancreatic cancer. He would say that I will take the treatment when it fits my schedule, and he would go skydiving one weekend. He would go to Pigeon Forge the next weekend. And he would take 1 or 2 weeks break here and there, and I respected his choice, and I said, I agree with you. Do what you like is the best. And palliative care and hospice is a continuum. Palliative care initially, when they're diagnosed, we know it may not be a curable situation, but still it's treatable. And we treat them and provide all kinds of support, pain management and psychological support, social support, financial support. Financial toxicity is becoming a big aspect of cancer care because as newer drugs, even though they are better, they are more expensive. So we tie into foundations, American Cancer Society, each drug company, they have their own foundations to help patients afford the medicines. And a lot of the patients get medicines completely free. Each drug company, Pfizer, Merck, they give $200 million, $500 million drugs for free every year to their patients. So it's just that we have a liaison in our office who will contact and get the medicines for the patients.
Great, thank you.
It is a really important issue, particularly people have mentioned CAR T-cell therapy, which is this new therapy that is really miraculous, but it costs $475,000 for one treatment, and many insurance companies are not ready to pay for that yet. And even though we have something that can cure something that has a 50-60% chance of working in someone who otherwise would have almost no chance, there are patients who just can't afford it, and then trying to decide who gets it is very challenging.
So,
Thank you.
what happens to people like Martin Saccarelli, who charge something that was costing $7.50 to $750, something like that? So there could be some cases like that in cancer treatment, cancer medication.
In terms of
Martin
overcharging,
Overcharging.
Gouging,
it's a very complicated area because, as Dr. Krish mentioned, to bring one drug to market, probably 98% of the drugs that they try to bring to market are failures. And so it costs millions and millions and millions of dollars in research and background to try to do this. And so the drug companies, to some extent, have to sort of make themselves, have to be financially responsible to their investors. Which don't take from that I'm supporting the really high prices that they cost, but on some level you can understand that.
Great.
The same question was answered by the dean of the Emory Medical School, and he said instead of going for pharmaceuticals, go for herbaceuticals. I mean, these are herbs and they're like the barks of trees and things like that. In Shimaga district in Karnataka, this person treats, there are mile-long queues for seeing him, and he asks what's the problem. He himself goes and chops the barks of the trees. He's got a whole paraphernalia of trees with him, and he takes off the barks and gives it to them, and the cure rate is pretty high, 75% or more.
Definitely. So Dr. Shah, very good
May I
examples.
just respond? So I've actually watched the documentary that you're talking about from Shimoga. So I just want to let you know that there are 9 drugs that we use in pediatric cancer that started life as herbs. You know, the very first, I mean, Vinca rosea, and so in fact, many drugs started life, aspirin started life,
Right.
you know, chloroquine started life as a plant product. And then after that, you find out what is the active ingredient, and then you have quality control and manufacturing and all of that. I think that the need of the hour is research.
Right.
But for research, we would have driven this bullock cart to come here today. And so I think that no form of knowledge is inferior so long as it meets the best standards, currently.
Definitely. And that segues to the nice question that I have for Anna and Piker. The question I have is, of course, we've been talking about finance and financial incentives and the new drug markets, and the challenging is for more funding. So what is the main, if you had funds today, what's the gap there that we need more research for? And Dr. Chris talked about the public outcry. So if you want any policy change that you want to see, it only happens because of you and me and all of us as public citizens. So how do you see yourself championing, Piker, the research that Anna does?
All right, so being on the side of the patient and patient's family, we've seen right now, so my son is cancer-free, but I continue to have anxiety about the long-term side effects. There are papers that I have signed that have, the list of all of the things that I agree to, that these are the potential risks. And there are other forms of cancer that could result from this chemotherapy that he has received. So I couldn't, definitely I would advocate for more research. That's one of the biggest answers. And
have you talked to any of the representatives who are interested in cancer or are able to relate to pediatric cancer?
I have not, but as part of the neuroblastoma survivors group, I think there was a bill that was introduced a little while back, and that was also again asking for more funding. And so we tried collecting some signatures as parents to try to help that cause. But definitely, funding around research, and even some kind of long-term support for these families where after 5 years, you're not really followed because I guess 5 years is the benchmark for survival rate. And so after that, what happens way long-term?
Well, so there, we've talked about basic science research and clinical research, but there's a whole new area of survivorship research, which, we talk about 5 years being cured, but when you're cured at 5 years, we don't just let you go or let patients go. We follow them or we make recommendations for life because there are side effects that we know about. There's something called the Childhood Cancer Survival Study, which was started 25 or 30 years ago, and a group in Minneapolis actually decided that they were going to collect data on patients who were survivors of childhood cancer. And now this database includes 15, 20, 25,000 patients, and it follows them every year, every couple of years to learn about some of the side effects that we didn't expect beforehand. And there are many, many things that we're learning about: effects on the heart, effects on the brain, effects on development, effects on relationships, social integration, all that kind of stuff. So there is research into that in those areas. What people who are advocates for pediatric cancer research tend to focus on is basic science or drugs or new treatments that can help people now, and which is important. There's no question. But it gets back to something we talked about earlier, which is that because there are relatively few pediatric cancer patients, there's many drugs that are just sitting there that we haven't even begun to test in pediatric cancer patients. We all, in our own research, we say, well, we need to develop new drugs. There are drugs that are available, but we just haven't tested them because of the patient numbers. I was in Washington. We were talking about advocacy. I was in Washington last Thursday and Friday as part of Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, and we were on Capitol Hill, and there were a number of representatives from, senators and representatives from the House who came to these sessions that we had about pediatric cancer and pediatric cancer research. And so we talked to them, and what are they going to say? They're all say, oh, yes, we support this. In our district is such and such hospital. It's a great place, and so on. And they say all this stuff, but then when it comes down to it, they just don't allocate enough funds to research. But if you talk to them and if you advocate with them enough, there's many, many groups that do this. Hopefully, eventually, they'll listen.
Sure. So Anna, I'm coming to you, Dr. Krish, hold on. So Anna, do you have any gaps that you could use the funds for pediatric cancer research? Or has all the fields been covered? Any funding, any sort of funding? If you had requested, what would it be for?
I personally, or as a representative?
As a representative personally.
I think with every type of different pediatric cancer, there are going to be different challenges. One of the major challenges for pediatric brain tumors that we study is the problem of recurrence. When those tumors come back, the kids don't get operated on, and that's it. There's no hope for them. And so we need to better understand causes of recurrence to try to come up with ways that we could potentially treat recurrent patients so that they could survive. But that's just brain tumors. I'm sure leukemia and lymphomas have their whole own host of challenges, and osteosarcomas, the bone cancers, they all have different challenges that they face that either there's shortcomings in funding for, or the research is still too new to actually have enough data to support funding. But still, we need to throw some Hail Mary passes out there and get potentially big results from risky research.
Definitely. So the next question is thank you, Anna, for Dr. Krish and Ranjit. Advocacy, right? You seem to be very passionate about advocacy and educating the community what their rights are and what they can achieve. But advocacy, does it mean opening up another nonprofit, or does it mean using the skills and the knowledge base and the population to get a bill passed rather than opening up a nonprofit, but also supporting the nonprofits that already exist to do some things that we would hope for?
Two mothers, one American and one British, got the United States to invest in research in malaria, which does not exist in the United States. Okay, so the one mother can actually change the world. There are 270,000 survivors of childhood cancer. Okay, if these 270,000 people showed up in 270,000 town halls, they will get the attention of those people. So I think involve yourself in government, locally, regionally, nationally. You have a lot more power than you think.
Thank you so much, Ranjit.
So he talked about one mother. Let me talk about another mother. And you do send out an email after this event, and I will give you the link of that YouTube video. It's a TEDx video. I think most of us should watch it. If you have a few 15, 18 minutes at some point, please watch it, because this is a mother who had a 6-year-old boy who was diagnosed with brain cancer. She researched, it was a 2.5, 3-year-old fight that family had. And all through that period of time, she got across to hundreds of doctors globally to find a cure, because there was no non-cure for that type of cancer. And the treatment that is now formed, and again, you should watch the video to really understand that journey, is named after her son. Her son's name is Noah, so it's called Noah something. So it is, and she is, the child did not survive, but the mother fights on. And the name, I mean, that's the best part of it, I thought. that the name of the cure is actually named after the child whose mother fought the battle, continues to fight it. So one of the things that we realize as a part of this is that, typically achievement is anonymous. One of the best things I like about America, honestly, is that when there is an event like this and you have veterans in the audience, you ask them to stand up and we give them a round of applause. I'm amazed every time that happens, because that's when you realize that achievement is anonymous. These are the people who fought for us. And just like that, every mother does the same thing. So I guess when I'm here sitting talking about Access Life is not me. Access Life is those people working in India with the families, those ladies who are actually working in our centers, taking care of those families, taking care of the children. That is Access Life. We are just here trying to spread the message. We are not Access Life, really, right? So I think that fact that there is a lot all of us can do just by, one, recognizing the need, second, finding out avenues where you can reach out. We are always looking for help. I mean, Piker and I gotten because Zoya came in for our spelling bee contest, and we just started talking, and now she's a part of the organization, and we want obviously many more of you to be a part of our organization. We are small. We are very, very careful about how we grow because we want to manage that growth. But the need for growth is very clear. We all know. We are still doing, think about it, we are just still doing one or few hospitals in one city in India for one type of, or one, let's say, one phase of cancer, or one, at a particular part of your life. In cancer, there is so much to do. In India, the other cities to do. If you go beyond India, in Africa, there's so much to do. So there's so much to do. I would obviously not say that there is no need for another non-profit. Obviously, we should actually find out a cause and that we are kind of committed to. The second aspect I wanted to highlight is, please understand the difference between sympathy and empathy. It's good to have a sympathetic thought in terms of, okay, I really feel sad for you, or I feel for you, I understand what you're going through. But more importantly, the element of empathy is when you put yourself in the shoes of the other person and try to replicate the feelings that that person goes through. I think that will make the difference. And if you, as a part of your journeys in your lives, associate yourself with an empathy, I think it's a reason for you to go after that. It might be childhood cancer, it might be something else. But I think that is a seed of your passion that will drive you towards a direction. If you're here to help us, we would obviously love that help, and we welcome that help.
Thank you, Ranjit. Dr. Char, how about 15-second closing thoughts from each of the panelists, starting with you, and then we'll go with the next steps.
Yeah, yoga and Ayurveda, they open up a lot of fields for any kind of cancer. I think we should not live anymore in silos without windows. Go for best practices. See what evidence is available, wherever it's available in the world, and make good use of that kind of evidence, and see if it can be employed here, even without FDA approval, if it's possible.
Thank you so much. Yes, that really makes sense. Thank you, Dr. Char. 15-second closing thoughts from each one of you.
First of all, thank you very much for all of you being here. Some of you have probably had some experience with this cause, but others might not have. But you just chose your Saturday afternoon to be with us, and I'm very, very thankful for that. All of us from Access Life, thank you, and thank you, Nazira, for that. There are events that we are a part of regularly within the community. There are events that you organize, and you just call us and say, can you come and can represent the cause? We would be happy to do that. We want this nature of advocacy as well, so that we are able to get into the community. We are able to get across to physicians. And honestly, I was talking about this to Nazira earlier, that we have done a fairly good job of connecting to the community. We have really not and Access Life has not done a very good job of connecting to the physicians network. So I really, really appreciate that opportunity to be here with all of you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Singh.
In an adult cancer world, what I would say is an ounce of prevention is more than a pound of cure. So prevention is the key. Why other countries are ahead of US in having a longer lifespan is because they spend overall a lot less, but they're spending all the money in prevention. So I would say definitely go to go for regular checkups. And even if, and the other thing was that, whatever your intuition is, if you think something's wrong with you, even the doctors don't know as much about you as you yourself know. So if you think something's wrong, insist on pursuing as to what is wrong. Obviously, if you have all the tests come back fine, then you can settle back and relax. But I would say that be your own advocate and go for all the preventive checkups, be it mammogram, be it colonoscopy, be it just an yearly checkup, because a lot of times things can be detected early. Not always, but a lot of times things can be detected early if you go for your regular checkups.
Prevention. Thank you so much, Dr. Singh. Dr. Wexler?
Well, I want to thank you again for inviting me to be part of this. I think it's really important to remember that pediatric cancer, although it's rare, is not just one disease. There's lots of different types of pediatric cancer. They require lots of different treatments that include medical treatments, but also focusing on the psychosocial part is really, really important. Because we do so well, relatively speaking, because 80% of children are cured of cancer, that means that there are many people that you encounter every day who may have had cancer as children. And so survivorship is a really, really important issue. Even though we cure 80% of patients, many of them have significant long-term side effects that impact them, and that's an area that we need more research in. Trying to get research for that area, for basic science, for clinical trials, all that stuff, it's really, really important. We have to advocate more and more.
Thank you. Piker?
Thank you, Nazira, for giving me the opportunity to share my perspective and share my experience. So as a mom, all I'm going to say to this audience is I see so many people here. And just a small group, every small group can make a difference. So I would urge you to get involved. Find out, you can, an afternoon that you spend at a hospital or just volunteering somewhere or engaging in an organization like Access Life that's working at grassroots level will make a big difference. And as I mentioned in my earlier talk, right, just someone coming in and checking in on us. Sometimes a parent who's going through some of this doesn't remember when they ate their last lunch. So if you step in and provide a little respite, that goes a long way. So just my message to this audience is get involved and try to volunteer or help out whenever you hear of a case where, or an organization that is doing research or trying to support cause or raise money in order to support families that are going through this horrendous disease. Thank
Piker,
you.
how can we help you?
Oh, I'm at a great place. I'm trying to see how I can help now, so I'm doing well.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Just providing this platform has been an amazing opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Anna?
I also want to thank you all for the invitation. It's been a very interesting experience. I just want to comment that finding cures for any kind of disease or any kind of cancer, pediatric or adult, is going to continue to require a lot of efforts in basic research. And that's going to continue for the future. And I see a lot of young faces here. So hopefully some of you are interested in growing up and becoming scientists. It's a fun and exciting career, and you literally never know what's going to happen next. So you're always on your toes. And you can make a difference kind of behind the scenes.
Thank you.
This has been a wonderful experience. I just loved this interaction with the panel and with you all. So I'm going to focus my message on one thing. One thing is why every young adult should be registered as a donor in the donor registry. So if you have leukemia and it comes back, then being able to have a donor, to have a bone marrow transplant, could be the difference between life and death. Your best possibility of a successful transplant is from a sibling. And your sibling is only likely to be a match 25% of the time. That means 75% of the time, you don't have an option for a curative treatment. The National Marrow Donor Program, DKMS, has a huge, nobody thought this was even possible, that people, out of the kindness of their heart, would be willing to be bone marrow donors to complete strangers that they don't know and can't meet, not allowed to meet. This is a miracle that of human kindness to do this. Today, minority populations in the United States have a very low probability of finding a donor. If you're African American, it's 19%. If you're South Asian, 30% on a good day. So that just imagine that 70 to 80% will not have a donor. And you can fix this. All it is a cheek swab. I hope that's all you're doing. A cheek swab, and fill out a questionnaire. To be the match, you can do it even online. I've taken care of many people who've donated. They can go to work the next day, okay? If you had a bone marrow harvest, sure, it's going to feel like you got kicked in the backside by a horse. But for the high of being able to save a life, you'll just be fine. So if minorities are underrepresented, we have nobody to blame but ourselves.
So thank you so much with that. I did sign up.
There were two lapses on my part. The first lapse was basically, I didn't thank Dr. Nazira. She's a catalyst in our society, in our community, and we owe a lot to her for promoting events like this, and also spreading the knowledge about all the necessary things that we need to know. Thank you, Dr. Nazira. And another lapse on my part, and the second lapse on my part, last 26 years, we've been offering free yoga classes. Yoga, there's no brand name to that yoga class. As yoga has come to us for 5,000 years. So that's in the Chinmaya Mission here in Norcross, and also in Riverdale Temple in Riverdale. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we'll just take one question because of interest of time. So go ahead. Here.
I have one question. Some people, they're scared for the...
Here.
Sorry. Some people scared for the donating the bone marrow, anything. So you can give the answer, something like that.
So I've taken care of 9-month-old babies who've been bone marrow donors. Okay? So anybody, who's in general good health can be a bone marrow donor. The bone marrow has incredible regenerative potential. It's like a factory that can call 15 times the number of workers on a given day. So it can completely recover immediately, and it's not a surgery. You could just have a central line and be just connected to a machine, or you have a needle stuck in your back, and it's just a needle into the bone, and they suck it out and put it in a bag. I've seen hundreds of children leave at 2 hours. They go home after that.
Thank you so much.
It's completely safe to do.
Usually for adults, it's like a blood donation. So they just take blood, they run it through a machine, and they just collect the stem cells and give rest of your blood back to you. So it's just like a blood donation. And they do give you some shots before that to build up the stem cells. So you will get some shots, you will have some soreness in the back. But overall, there's no danger to the life of the donor.
So
That's
that all
re-
happens
That's
once.
the main thing which people are concerned about. There's no danger to the life. Basically, it's like a blood donation.
No,
that
I know it happened to me. I donate the kidney to my husband. So that's the reason some people, they're scared something happened. So that's the reason I want to, for everybody, so nothing has happened.
We do have the booth today here who are doing the match. So please go ahead and sign up your name. I'm going to sign up, so I hope people follow me today. Again, I'd like to take time to thank each one of you for taking your Saturday evening and afternoon to be here to spread the message and your positivity and volunteerism and the need for research for pediatric cancer and the much need for supportive services for nonprofits that takes care of children. The next step is I would like to bring the Kaushik family to the stage to hand some gifts and mementos to the panelists. You know that the Chai and Chats just doesn't happen. It takes a budget to conduct these meetings, and the Kaushik family is helping inaugurate the family-supported Chai and Just Chat. So it's supported by them today. Thank you again. If you can come, and you must have seen their story in the profile. On the second day of his entrance to US, he bought a bike, and now he's raised 3 children, and he contributes the success to his bike and his hard work.
So thank you, Uncle and Auntie Ji. Please, I.